Good morning, friends. It's Saturday, and I'm back with Chapter 9 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Ghost Recon. I woke with a sunbeam shining directly in my eyes. As I rolled away from it, I tried to figure out how this could even happen, as my room was on the west side of the house. Looking around, I found myself lying across the foot of the bed, with my head away from the wall. The sunbeam was shining into my open bedroom door, through the window by the desk, across from the potbelly stove, and the angle of the rising sun was just right. I got out of bed and got dressed. Mark was still asleep on his bed, and I made sure I was quiet so as not to wake him. I had some plans for this day, and did not need him to slow me down. When Grandpa left after dinner the night before, he told me not to worry about quicksand in the swamp. He said he and Rudy had told that to all the boys in the neighborhood back then in order to keep them from finding or messing around with the still. He also told me that cold spots on the floor or in rooms could sometimes be where a ghost was. I was kind of surprised that he said ghost, but he obviously thought I had visited Gracie's ghost. At one point when I went to the bathroom, I heard Grandpa and Dad talking about Gracie, and they said something about a witch. Did they really think she was a witch? Thinking about these things and what they had told me about Gracie, I knew I had to go back to the shack and see for myself after breakfast, despite being told I should not. Besides, I didn't really believe in ghosts, except for a good ghost story. I finished my cereal and put my dishes into the sink. No one else got up or came into the kitchen, and I figured they were all still asleep. Quietly, I slipped out the back door into the morning and headed off across the field past Fort Stix. I entered the woods where I had emerged the day before and onto the path towards Gracie's cabin. The woods seemed different today for some reason. The path was more overgrown than I remembered it being the day before, and it seemed brighter. It did not matter, though, as I had a specific destination in mind. Before long, the trees ahead opened up, and instead of stepping into the small clearing at the cabin, I found myself on the shoulder of a road. I looked both ways on the road and knew it had to be the road I saw by the cornfield. Question was, how did the path lead me here instead of to the cabin? I backtracked along the path a ways and found what looked to be another path leading in the direction of the cornfield. This path also led me out to the edge of the road. I looked back into the woods and then down the road to the end of the woods where the cornfield began. I was nearly to the end of the woods and decided to walk to the cornfield and then cut back across to approach the cabin from there as I had the day before. Before long, I was standing at the edge of the trees looking at the cabin. I had trouble finding it at first because the weeds and trees had grown up heavily around it. There was no longer a clearing around the cabin. Approaching the cabin, the windows were still boarded up except for the one in front, but now it had no glass. I walked up on the porch, old boards creaking with every step, and looked around. The chair and table were no longer there, and I could see in the window that no one had been here in a very long time. Going around the side of the cabin, I saw the shed where the chicken coop had been was now just a crumbled pile of rotting wood, and the fence that once contained the chickens was gone. The garden was now just a patch of weeds, undiscernible from the woods around it. I sat down on a stump and looked around. Had I dreamed it all? I took the chicken foot from my pocket and made it move the way Gracie had done. It was a little dry at the edge of the skin where she cut it, but otherwise it was still soft and supple. Confusion riddled my thoughts as I tried to make sense of it. Getting up from the stump, I went to the front and pushed open the front door. It creaked and fell back against the wall behind it, opening up so I could enter. There was no furniture or curtains. Nothing to indicate this was someone's home. Light shone down through large holes in the wood roof, and one sunbeam landed on a big iron stove, sat in the back corner of the cabin in front of a brick chimney. A single pipe left the top of the stove at the back center and entered the bricks of the chimney. Approaching the stove, I saw something lying in the thick dust that covered the top. It was a chicken foot, and in the dust next to it was drawn a smiley face. I touched the chicken foot and found it soft. It was as fresh as the one in my pocket and appeared to be the mate to mine. Leaving the cabin, I headed toward the path at the edge of what used to be the clearing. There was no explanation for what I experienced. I knew I had shared a few moments with the lady the day before, and even had a keepsake in my pocket. I stopped by the trees and looked back at the cabin. "Miss Gracie," I said to the woods and cabin, "thank you for coming to visit me yesterday. I will remember what you told me about feeding my garden. I hope to maybe see you again someday." When I was done, I turned and headed back to the farm. It seemed like it only took a few minutes before I was emerging in the field by Fort Stix, and I headed for the back of the garage where I knew there was a barrel. I cleared the weeds away from around the barrel and put them inside. Then I grabbed the half bag of manure left over from fertilizing my garden and poured it in over the weeds. Finally, I got the water hose and filled the barrel about 3/4 full and put the lid on top without sealing it. I would check it in a couple days to see how it was doing and maybe stir it. According to Gracie, this would ferment into tea for my garden. Returning the water hose to the sprinkler, I watered the garden and headed into the house to get a drink. The sun was almost overhead, and I knew I had been gone for several hours. Everyone should be up and moving by now. I had not realized how thirsty I was until the cold, clean well water was racing down my throat. It took 3 glasses full before I felt I had enough. Wiping my face on my sleeve, I put the glass in the dish drainer and leaned against the counter for a moment, just thinking. The kitchen was in sore need of a paint job, but I had to give it to my mother. It was clean. My eyes followed the line made by the molding running around the meeting of ceiling and wall. It began at the end of the cabinets, went across the outside wall, around over the dining room wall, to where it stopped suddenly at the entrance to the hall. It just stopped. No miter, no decorative block, just stopped. I found this odd and walked to the entry of the hall to see if the molding began on this side from the cabinets. It did not. Then my eyes traveled down the wall and settled on the door to the basement. The dark, cold basement, which reminded me of a well. For a moment, I considered if there was anything I wanted to do with the rest of the day. Nope, my schedule was open, so I would have to root out some entertainment wherever it was hiding. As I turned away to go back outside, I felt a cold chill and looked back at the door. The image of the small door on the top of the wall suddenly popped in my head, and I knew it must be explored now while it was full-on sunlight. There was only a window on the east side of the basement, but it was not yet noon, and the sun should be shining in. I opened the door and flipped on the light. I could see the sun was shining bright on the curtain below, and knew if I opened the curtain, it would be even brighter. I cast a glance at the pistol hanging over the stairs, and reminded myself that I needed to tell my dad about it as I descended. Reaching the bottom, I slid the curtain to one side and let the sun penetrate. Much like one would find in a well, the blocks making up the walls were stacked into place almost haphazardly. Gobs of mortar used to glue them together pushed out between the blocks and were not even troweled smooth. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and of course the floor was dirt. Everything about the basement gave me creeps. I walked over to the little door and pushed on the latches to open them. They turned easily, and then the door swung open. It was dark under that part of the house, except for a beam of sunlight I could see shining through a hole in the floor. If my memory was correct, that hole should be in the vicinity of the desk in the corner by the bathroom door. Poking my head in, my eyes adjusted to the limited light provided by the sunbeam after a few moments, and I could see fairly well. I looked around, studying the space. The floor joists under that part of the house were the same as above the basement. 3 pipes ran along the eastern wall and disappeared into the block wall at the front of the house. I guessed they must be for the sink in the closed-in front porch that used to be the beauty parlor. Other than that, there was just a smooth dirt floor of very fine-grained dust and dirt. At the edge of the circle of light created by the sunbeam, something glinted. I could not tell what it was, so I climbed in to investigate. Crawling on my belly like a soldier doing a low crawl, I inched my way over and grabbed the shining object. It was a brooch pendant made of silver with an ivory cameo inlay. It was tarnished, but I could see it was real silver. I tried to open the brooch to see what was inside, but it was stuck closed. Then I heard a noise above me and looked through the hole where the sunlight came through. My brother Mark was standing in the hall talking to my mother in the bedroom. He was asking her where I was, and I overheard my mother say she did not know. Then he turned and went to our bedroom before coming back again. I had a sudden inspiration. It was an idea so good, I had to choke back a giggle so I wouldn't be revealed. Pushing the brooch into my pocket, I dug the chicken foot out of my other pocket and gently eased it through the hole in the floor between my brother's feet. I pushed and pulled on the tendons. The claws made a scritch, scritch, scritch sound as they scratched on the wood that seemed very loud to me from underneath, but my brother didn't notice. I tried again harder this time. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Still, he did not see, so I slowly pulled it back out of the hole so I could see what was happening. My brother turned to go to the bedroom again as I looked. I was disappointed. Here I went through all the trouble to crawl into this dusty old crawl space to set up the perfect scare, and he did not notice. I heard him coming back again, and quickly pushed the chicken foot up through the hole. Scritch, scritch, scritch! Again as it scratched the floor. Nothing. Frustrated, I worked the chicken foot in and out of the hole violently, making it seem as if it were trying to claw its way through the hole, and then, scritch, 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 it scratched the floor. This time, I was rewarded with a shriek, but it was not my brother. It was my mom. I heard her screaming for my dad, and quickly pulled the chicken foot back into the hole and moved out of the circle of light in case they looked in. The bathroom door slammed open, and I heard my dad ask Mom what was the matter. I could not make out what she was saying, but I heard my dad come over and stand on the hole. As the sunlight disappeared, and all I could hear was mumbling, I eased back across the crawl space and out of the little door. I closed it quickly and went to the window. Pulling the curtain back in place to hide evidence of my presence, I climbed out the window and crept to the corner of the house so I wouldn't be seen through the windows. Once I was clear, I stood up and sauntered into the house to get a drink of water, as if I had no clue what was going on. My dad looked down the hall at me coming in the back door and basically ruled me out as the culprit. How could I have done anything in the hall if I was outside? He said something to my mother, and I heard her shriek something about living in a haunted house before she slammed the bedroom door. I got my drink of water and watched my father go out to the garage. I guessed he was going to work on something, but heard him mumbling about a crazy woman as he went by. I almost choked on my water as I held in the need to giggle and snorted water through my nose. Mark came wandering into the kitchen then and asked me to get him a glass of water. I grabbed a plastic glass for him and filled it. After he got a drink, he put it on the counter and turned to me. "I'm hungry," he said. "Mom said she was going to make lunch, but her door is closed, and she told me to go away when I knocked." I looked around and saw there was a loaf of bread on the table. "Peanut butter or bologna?" I asked. "Can I have jelly too?" Mark asked. I looked into the cupboard and saw a jar of apple jelly. Taking it out, I let him see, and he smiled and nodded. I grabbed a butter knife and went to the table to make us sandwiches, as I was hungry too. I even cut them into triangles the way we liked them. We took the sandwiches into the dining room and sat at the table to eat. Mom came out of her room a few minutes later and saw us at the table. She did not say anything, but turned and went back to her room and closed the door. I was surprised she did not even make herself a cup of coffee. As we were finishing, Dad came in and grabbed a couple pieces of bread before going into the fridge and slapping several pieces of bologna between them. He went back out to the garage with his sandwich and a cold beer without saying anything to us either. I put my plate in the sink and headed out to the back porch with Mark following me. As we left the porch to go into the garage, I saw Aunt Florence walking into the garage. She looked at the truck Dad had painted and then walked over to talk to him where he sat in front of a fan. I made my way to the workbench and looked through the paints and chemicals until I found what I needed. I would have asked Dad, but he was busy talking and I did not want to bother him. I wrapped the can of WD-40 in a rag and held it down by my side as we left the garage and headed for Fort Stix. I heard Aunt Florence saying something about noise and paint fumes, but I had no idea why. When we got to Fort Stix, I sat on my bucket and took out the brooch I had found. I sprayed it with the WD-40, especially along the seam where the two halves joined, and on the hinge. After a few minutes of wiping and working at it, the brooch popped open, revealing pictures of my grandmother and grandfather from their wedding day. I realized the picture was from the 1940s and put the brooch in my pocket to keep it safe. I left the WD-40 in the bucket with the rag and stepped out of the fort. I was definitely going to have to install windows soon because it was too hot to hang out in there for very long. Mark was messing with something outside the fort in the dirt, and I figured this would be a good time to find out how he really felt about snakes. "So, were you scared of the snakes yesterday?" I asked. "I always thought you liked snakes and stuff." "No, I like snakes," he looked at me. "I just got scared when I felt something crawling on me and didn't know what it was." "Do you want to see some snakes?" I asked. "Yeah, but where are they?" His eyes lit up. I walked over to the nearest car part and lifted it up. Immediately, several snakes began to slither away, and I grabbed a large one. Holding it up to get a closer look, it struggled at first and then settled down to just relax as it lay across my arm. Mark reached out to stroke its head and look at it. I put the snake down and watched it crawl away under another car part and headed towards the woods to explore. Since I had looked just inside the tree line earlier, we went a little further in this time until we could just see the edge of the trees. Looking around, it seemed as though there was stuff everywhere. We found an old round hubcap that was bowl-shaped, a V-shaped hood ornament from a Cadillac, and a hood ornament from a 1950s truck that kind of looked like a space-age jet plane. I also found another gallon glass jug. This one did not have a stopper in it, but that was okay. We carried our new treasures to Fort Stix and put them in the small corner. It became apparent very quickly that if we were going to continue to find stuff, we were going to need more space. I locked the door as we left and was turning to head back to the woods when Dad hollered at us to come and get in the truck. "Where are we going, Dad?" I asked as I settled into the seat. "Hardware store," he said, starting the truck. "We're going to get the stuff so we can build a chicken coop." "Are we going to get the chickens and ducks too?" I asked. The excitement in me was rising. "Not today," he said and paused to light a cigarette. "First, we're going to build the coop and get it ready. Then we'll go back for the birds." This seemed reasonable to me, and I settled back for the ride to the hardware store. It did not take long to get there. I followed Dad into the store, and Mark was beside me. At least he was when we were walking up the steps onto the porch. I turned around to see where he was as I entered the store, and he was standing at the door staring straight ahead. Dad kept on going to the service counter at the back while I tried to get Mark to come inside. "Come on, Mark," I said and waved him in. He shook his head and pointed at the stuffed two-headed calf standing behind me. "What, this?" I asked, and knocked on its head, producing a hollow wooden sound. "It's stuffed!" He slowly walked forward until he was standing in front of it and tentatively knocked on the head as I had done. He grinned at me and looked closer at it. One of the heads was mounted with the mouth open so you could see its teeth and tongue. I watched him as he stared into the open mouth, as if looking to see if he could see its throat. Then he reached up and touched its teeth. I could not resist such a glorious opportunity. I gave it a little bump from behind and growled. "Dad!" Mark screamed and went running up the aisle to where Dad stood at the counter, screaming the whole way. "It growled and tried to eat me!" I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.